Okay, that was a fabulous start to the day, and it gets, I hope, better. May I ask Saurabh Kirpal and Rohin Bhatt to come forward, please? Saurabh Kirpal, Rohin Bhatt. And Jyoti Malhotra. Why not? The more the merrier. Come. And we do need a mic. We do need a couple of mics up here on stage, please.
You sit in the middle. Sure.
No, I'll sit in the center.
Okay.
Will you do that, please? I don't know what
you
to
keep
say.
that, they'll give us.
While you're waiting for them to say.
Ladies and gentlemen, while we are waiting for our panelists to come up and the setup to happen, we want to tell you about the fantastic stalls that we have outside in the lounge. And we have this anti-aging products counter and the tea.
Thank you.
And Rahul swears by it that it works. A lot of people from here have taken it, and he says it's a fantastic product, so I think it's worth giving it a shot. Pick your samples.
Okay. If you're getting tea, coffee, come back soon, please, because we've already been
Should
talking
we
so
wait
much.
for these tea, coffee type people, or should we start?
No, we start.
We start?
Yeah.
Okay,
So,
then get your
may
tea,
I-
coffee. You've got 30 seconds.
Give me 2 minutes, please. So we've heard a lot yesterday. Those of you who attended Radha Kumar's session with Bhupendra on the Constitution and whether, we have a democracy anymore. This morning we heard Devdutt talk about the patriarchal gaze. And this session is really about asking the question, in our Constitution, we have it written that there is justice, liberty, equality for all segments of Indian society. We've had enough evidence in our sessions of the last 2 days to say that we have gender issues, we have caste issues, so that seems to be a bit of a pipe dream. So is it a pipe dream? Is it something we can achieve? We hope your discussion will take us through that. Yeah, thank you. All yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, would you like to sit down? Because I think it is somewhat courteous on all our behalves to sit at least and listen to our panelists right here. So if I'm going to give you 5 seconds, everyone, to sit down. Or those of you who want to get tea and coffee, that's perfect. But the gentleman in the peach turban, would you like to sit down? Thank you. No, he hasn't heard me.
It's a tough task to follow Devdutt Patnaik. But,
Yeah, it is.
I promise to be entertaining. And
Okay, the lady in the pink, in the sari dupatta, mustard, very pretty mustard dupatta with the red border. Would you like to sit down? Standing next to the gentleman in the peach turban, lovely peach colored turban on this gorgeous morning. Okay,
yes.
ladies and gentlemen, who is equal? Saurabh Kirpal has this book. Saurabh is one of India's best known advocates, lawyers. He works in the Supreme Court of India and in the High Court in Delhi. Rohin Bhatt is a young lawyer, very young lawyer, and slowly making a name for himself. We will talk about the idea or the concept of equality. Now, who is equal is the name of this book. But because these two gentlemen on my left are lawyers, I will ask them to talk about, Article 14, which in the Constitution, which guarantees every Indian the equality before the law. But what is the law? And do we talk only about the Constitution? Does the Constitution actually give a variety of Indians? And let's talk about concepts like caste. And I know most of the people in this room here are probably upper caste. Do you think that your equality is my equality, or the equality that Dalits or backward castes must also get like you do? What about gender or sexuality? Are heterosexuals equal to homosexuals, or gay people, or queer people? We have a a lot of jargon that we use in our everyday lives. So let me start by asking you, Saurabh, first of all, welcome to this session, and Rohin, welcome. The first question to you is, why have you written this book?
Well, because the answer to this question posed in the book is sort of almost despairing. Who is equal? I think we all know that almost no one is. Almost no one is. So the book was written in an attempt to examine the causes of inequality. Why does inequality exist? And we talk so much about equality, and we try to do so much taxation, reservations. We try to do so much to mitigate that inequality. Why is it so stubbornly persistent? Why in the last 75 years have we not been able to shake away even a portion of that inequality? You know, women have made progress in their careers, at home, over the last 75 years, but it's nowhere near the amount we need. So what is the cause of inequality? That's one attempt that I was trying to examine. And second was, what can the law do about inequality? We know that you change society by interventions, legislative, executive, social, of course, also movements. But since I'm a lawyer, I wanted to examine what is it that the law has done about it, and why has the law been so spectacularly unsuccessful in removing the inequality that exists and pervades our society. You know, you mentioned some axes.
Parameters, yeah.
So caste. Very often I enter a room, I think all of us do, and people will say, I don't even know what my caste is. Why do you talk about caste? Caste doesn't exist. That is, of course, complete expression of your caste privilege. An upper caste person doesn't know their caste because they don't need to know their caste. So that's a problem with caste. Sex, as I said, women's positions have just not improved in 75 years. You cure one particular area of discrimination, another hydra head creeps up somewhere or the other. And the best example of the inequality that women have is to just look at the top echelons of any form of either governance or corporations, institutions. Why are such few women there? So that's inequality. So I wanted to write about equality to awaken the thought process in people as to why is this a problem, why does it still persist?
Rohin, can I come to you? And you're a young lawyer in Delhi. You were involved with the case before the Supreme Court last year. This is when 50 gay couples went to the Supreme Court last January, that's January 2023, and said to the court, why is it that under our constitution, under India's constitution, gay people are unequal? Or as gay people, like, there's a variety of words to describe themselves: queer, gay, homosexual, lesbian, LGBTQ, AI. So first of all, why were you part of this movement, if you like? What did the Supreme Court say? And where do you go from here?
Well, I think entering into the case was more of a happenstance. I happened to work with lawyers who have been historically...
Are you gay, Rohin?
Yes, I am, very much so.
Okay.
Working with lawyers who have historically worked on those cases, and so this case kind of fell into my lap. So that was more of a happenstance, but going through the case, I think, taught me so much about the law, but more importantly about myself. The visceral arguments that were made and the emotions that went through one's psyche while the case was being argued, or while, even in the run-up to the case, the amount of homophobia that was fueled by the case being live-streamed.
Tell me about it a little bit. Tell us about it.
Well, all sorts of things, I think there were threats, death threats, there were slurs, there was trolling, and, what have you, your regular IT cell targeting of individuals. But I think more so after the judgment, when the Supreme Court unanimously held that there was no fundamental right to marry. I think on the fourth day of the case, in the afternoon session, we knew we were losing the case. And I remember having a conversation with Saurabh just a few days before the judgment saying, what do you think is going to happen? And I think all of us agreed that whether we win the case or not, the court should at least recognize a fundamental right to marry. This was because there was at least 2 decades worth of precedent in 2 or 3 major cases where the court had itself said that right to marry a person of your choice for consenting adults is a fundamental right. This was done in case of intercaste and interfaith couples. So we thought, this is a logical sequitur that would follow. But since that did not follow, I think even those rights, which we thought were hitherto strongly founded in a substratum of equality, of people to marry a person of their own choice, as we are now surrounded by love jihad laws or Uttarakhand UCC, which make it far more difficult for people in relationships that don't have sanction of the society to marry.
So Saurabh, tell me about this. Why does the Constitution of India give everybody, male and female, and perhaps of the third gender too, the right to marry somebody of their choice if they want to, as long as it's consenting, yes?
Well, there's a short answer and a long answer. The short answer is no, because five
No.
judges of the Supreme Court have said so, right?
But aren't they violating the law?
Yeah, so that's the long answer. The short answer is no. And I suppose that goes down to a deeper question of who the Constitution belongs to. Does the Constitution as a text belong only to the 34 judges of the Supreme Court of India who finally say what it is? And is their word final? Or is Constitution something bigger than that? Is something there which is like constitutionalism, which resides in all of our hearts as citizens? That all of us also have a right to say, well, yes, technically you have interpreted the Constitution and you have found that there is no right to marry. But when I read that text, when I see the civilization which caused this Constitution to come into being, when I've seen the progress of the last 75, 80 years of where we have come, where we wish to go as a nation, would that reading of the Constitution, would my reading of the Constitution then say that those 5 judges are wrong? They've taken an oath of office, they have a certain place in the Constitution, and therefore their word means so much more. But I, as a citizen, can also say that, sorry, just because you're a judge and you've said something, doesn't make it right. And in my reading of that Constitution, which I am as entitled to do as anyone else, and those judges, once they take their robes off, are also citizens, of course, of this country, I find that there is no way you can possibly read the Constitution and say that 2 people who wish to get married cannot get married unless they are heterosexual. If a man and woman can choose to get married, then why is it that any two people can't? Because marriage has also changed in its meaning, right? There was a time when marriage was all about producing children. Well, if that be the case, are you going to stop menopausal women from getting married? Or are you going to stop sterile people from getting married, or older people from getting married? What about those couples who use birth control? So marriage is not about procreation anymore. So what is marriage about? Marriage is about the right of 2 people who love each other to live together and then get all those rights that every straight person has. That those rights must also come to a queer couple. So it's not about the institution of marriage as much as all those other rights that anyone has, and we take them for granted. So why should 2 people who are queer, we had a discussion about this word queer in the morning, Jyoti and I. She belongs to a certain school of thought that I hope we've changed your mind on why we use queer. But I think our Constitution is all about equality, justice, liberty, and fraternity. It's mentioned in the preamble. But if you read the text, the golden thread that runs through our Constitution is of freedom and autonomy. And my life, to lead my life the way I want to lead it without anyone telling me. And the legislature must support that.
So Rohin, you're a really young man. Now, when you read the preamble of the Constitution like I would, we the people, what does it mean to you?
Well, I think when we started framing of our Constitution, along with a movement for decolonization, there was also a parallel social movement that was going on. A movement to create a more equal society. We were divided on the lines of religion, race, caste, class, gender, and sexuality, dare I say. And when we created the Constitution, we created an equal society which consists of one class of citizens, that is, we the people of India. And that kind of meta also recreates itself in our equality code of the Constitution, Articles 14 to 18. So you have everything from saying no discrimination on the basis of gender, to the abolition of titles, to abolition of untouchability. So when we created the Constitution, the two parallel movements coalesced into one, into the Constituent Assembly. And reading those debates tell you that the founding fathers and the founding mothers of our republic wanted to divorce themselves from this deeply divided society that we had created into one that was where everybody was equal.
So, Saurabh, the question to me is that, look, there is a moment for everything, right? And if we all say that politics is a reflection of society, journalism is a reflection of society, the judiciary, I dare say, is a reflection of society, then should you push these, you know, what do you call them, the honorable judges, should you push them to abide by the Constitution? I mean, Ambedkar himself, who led the Constituent Assembly, was sort of disappointed by the Constitution that he produced.
Well, the Constitution was a result of many compromises.
Is that such a bad thing?
And that is not at all a bad thing,
Okay.
right? A constitution is meant to endure the way I hope our country endures. And one thing we must recognize is, in a country as diverse as India, to have one particular ideology or a thought process permeating every aspect of life will inevitably alienate another part of society. So we can't have a system of governance where you have a dominant school or way of thinking. And since the Constitution is supposed to encapsulate not only all that the society is, but all that the society that wishes to be, and it is meant to be a framework, a skeletal framework for the country's governance for the future, it's best that it is a result of a compromise. Because compromise means what? That no one's happy. You know, as a lawyer, sometimes we argue cases and sometimes matters get settled also, oddly enough. And my perception is that a good settlement is one where no one is happy, right? Because in that, it means that everyone gets at least a little bit of something. And that's how I think what our Constitution is. It's a result of compromises, which I think gives a lot to everybody. The problem is our way of thinking is that when someone is getting something, it's as though it's coming out of my own pocket. So when two queer people are getting married, there will be a section, a dominant section, will say, well, why are they getting this marriage? It's going to demolish my institution of marriage. As though giving something to someone is taking something away from someone else.
So would you also say that this is true for caste, for example? You know, I thought your reference to people like us and all of us in this room, upstanding folk from this part of the country, you ask them what your caste is, and I'm sure a lot of you will not know what your caste is, and which you said is sort of a reflection of your caste privilege. Now, when Dalits and backwards fight for their rights, what does the Constitution say? And can you talk to us a little bit about the basic structure from 1973 and how it exists today?
I think the first thing that when a Dalit or a OBC asks for reservation is they get confronted with this idea of merit. Saying, you are still, and that's what refers to what I was saying earlier, that you are getting something that belongs to me. I'm meritorious. You are only there because you have a particular caste and you're taking an advantage of it, and this is truly not fair. Without any sense of irony, recognizing the amount of privilege that merit has bestowed upon them, and that how much merit has come through their own caste privilege, right?
Give me an example of that.
Well, as I said, how many people are sitting here who are upper caste? Virtually everybody is they'll all have gone to the best college.
English-speaking type like
yes,
us.
Because the English is a medium of governance in India. It's exalted. How many Dalits will speak English? Even if they do go to the best school, they will come from a family where the parents, grandparents, or some generations above haven't been to school or college. So that culture of education, the culture of valuing education doesn't maybe exist in those families. So even if you do get a reservation, you get something, your entire, as I said, skeletal framework in the context of the Constitution, but even otherwise as a person, you don't have those people you can rely on in a Dalit house, which you would in a upper caste house. You come from families where your grandparents went to school. Dalit may not come from that background. And even if you do, and it's not just about education, but imagine centuries of being made to feel that you are a nobody, that your very shadow will pollute my existence. I think a lot of women in this audience will understand, because women have also been traditionally oppressed. And at some point, some women internalize that almost. I am not good enough. I am not worthy. So we have to fight that. So that is why the Constitution, coming to your question, it provides for equality. Everyone is equal. But then it says that to say everyone is equal is inherently unfair when people are actually unequal on the ground. To say everyone will be treated the same when in fact they are not the same to begin with, that is an instance of inequality being perpetuated in the name of merit. So the Constitution provides for reservations. That's not something new. That's not something that was originally there in the Constitution. Right. It came in 1950. So the original Constitution did not allow for reservations in educational institutions. And there was a case where the Supreme Court says, well, equality means you can't have any reservations. And the moment that judgment came, Champakam Durai Rajan, 1950, even before the first elections to the parliament had happened under the Constitution, the Constituent Assembly, which had given this whole long Bill of Rights to us, got so panicky, saying that what does this mean that there can be no reservations? It was also about property, that they amended the Constitution to provide for reservations, because they realized the explosive effect of not having reservations for the Dalits. So the founding fathers and the few founding mothers, Ambedkar, Nehru, long speeches in Parliament about why there is a need for reservations in educational institutions. So that has happened. The Constitution provides for it. The Constitution provides for reservations, of course, as you know, even in public employment, and interestingly, in a lot of constituencies, the reserved constituencies. So the idea is you empower and enable a group so that they can come up. That's how the Constitution works.
So Rohin, you know, as a young person, and I just want to ask, do you see, Saurabh is older than you, I'm much older than you. Yeah, you are, yeah. But young people like yourselves, in court, outside court, you come from Gujarat, the comparison between, you know, like a smaller town, like between Ahmedabad and Delhi, for example, are people more hopeful? And does the Constitution guarantee them this hope? That if you feel, if your rights are violated, you can go to court and say, you know, my lord, I don't know why I use that word, frankly, sorry, but that's another conversation.
Because they're godlike.
Yeah, well, can you go to the court and ask to be defended?
Well, yes and no. Yes, because we see every day hundreds of writ petitions being filed in the High Courts and the Supreme Court for violation of fundamental rights and other legal rights. But no, because access to lawyers is a big hurdle in access to justice. Lawyers are expensive, the litigation process is itself expensive. But having said that, I think there is a fundamental dissonance that is growing within the younger lot, if I may call ourselves that, is because day after day, we are witnessing that the fundamental basis of lawmaking is changing. We now have judges day in and day out who are getting more and more theocratic. We are getting more and more judges who are growing.
What do you mean by theocratic?
Well, these are judges who find sources of law in religion rather than in the Constitution. We are seeing more and more judges who are growing conservative. We are finding more and more judges who are, well, in a way, the executive appoints who they like and doesn't appoint who they don't like. I have somebody sitting next to me whose name has been originally recommended 7 years ago, reiterated 2 years ago, who's not being elevated because the powers that be think that he is going to be an inconvenience to them.
But, Saurabh, no, listen, that's a personal issue, and I don't want to talk about
No,
that
I
right
don't
now.
think it's a personal issue. It's a constitutional one.
Okay.
Because our judiciary should be representative of the people that it seeks to judge. The judges don't control the purse like the legislature does. The judges don't control the sword like the executive judge does. The only thing that they have is a moral high ground, which is why if we have increasing amount of judges who don't stick to the founding text that they swear their oath of allegiance to, or you have judges that have now openly given hate speeches prior to their elevation. Some have given after their elevation. Some have joined the BJP immediately after resigning and contested elections on BJP tickets. I think it's no longer a personal issue. I think it's a deeply constitutional one.
I think, Rohan, I take your point, and I do agree with you completely, because we all know, ladies and gentlemen, that the reason Saurabh Kirpal has not been elevated to the Delhi High Court is because of his sexual sort of, how should I put it? Sorry?
Orientation.
Orientation, yeah. Now,
Well, that's a fact, and there's so much that's been written about it that it's kind of
Yeah.
boring. But let's come to about what judges and moral authority of the court is.
but
And moving it away.
can I come back to what you said, Rohin, and I'd like to ask you. What Rohin said is that that now judges are increasingly looking at sources in religious texts, right? Hindu texts, Islamic texts. I don't know about any other texts, but is that happening more and more, Saurabh? And why do you think that's happening?
I don't see many Islamic texts being cited in. It's often the Gita which is quoted
In court?
in judgments. It's one thing to have a discussion in court where there's a free banter between judges and lawyers, and that should be free, unregulated. I think some part of, while I agree with the YouTube streaming of court proceedings, it does have a chilling effect on judges, so that's fine. But when judgments start quoting scripture as a canonical text, as something that is to be believed and relied upon. We just saw a session with Devdutt earlier, where he says that a myth is someone's imagination. It's not really ever based on fact, right? I think I might get lynched in certain sections if I say that some of these religious texts are based on myth. So relying on these myths is problematic when you have a perfectly decent text which should be your Gita, which is the Constitution of India. So rather than relying on the Constitution, when you start reverse engineering your reasoning and giving religious text as authority because you think it's important. Why is the judge citing a particular religious text in their judgment? Because surely they're supposed to decide as per the law, and they do decide as per law. So why is the religious text coming in? We often see poetry coming in, and there's nothing wrong with that. We see stories coming in. There's nothing wrong with that because you're trying to evoke certain kind of emotions, right? That's the art of judgment writing. But when a judge cites a religious source, it exhibits their mindset. They believe that they're sitting there in a non-secular capacity to dispense justice with a mind and an eye to a particular religious text. But the problem is the moment you do that, you oust every other religious text. That may not be your intention. I don't think judges are bad people. I don't think judges are necessarily bigots. Some are. But they need not be. But the effect of the judge of the Supreme Court quoting one religious text and not the other has a grave psychological impact on the minority community in India. And I think we've talked about caste, we've talked about women and gender and sexuality, but we haven't talked about what is almost becoming the elephant in the room, religion.
Which is religion, yes.
Yes.
So go ahead. So Saurabh, when you were talking, I was thinking of back to 1989 when L.K. Advani, the Rath Yatra of L.K. Advani, which about the whole issue was about the Ram Janmabhoomi, trying to avenge a wrong that happened 400 years ago. And he is a very intelligent leader of the BJP. And he said at the time, he said this may not be as per the law, but this is what millions of Indians believe, and millions of Hindus believe, that there must be a temple. And then you have in 2019 a Supreme Court, what shall I say?
Judgment.
Okay. And there was an arbitration behind the scenes, right? I want to ask you whether you thought that was wrong. I personally think that there should have been many conversations between opposing sides. It became a subject, an issue that was very, very complex. The Supreme Court judgment did give the land to the Hindu side, and to build a mosque, it sort of gave 5 acres of land much out, outside the sort of the Janmabhoomi area. Was that, in your view as a lawyer, was that the right thing to do?
Well, let me maybe deal with a slightly more non-controversial part of that judgment, and we'll come to the controversy. Let's not duck too much. You mentioned how the judges, and there was negotiations and conciliation meetings. I honestly don't think it's any part of the role of the Supreme Court or any judge to appoint mediators and ask parties to do this, especially in a matter as sensitive as this. This dispute has been running for 70, 80 years, right? It was not going to be settled by mediation to be referred by the Supreme Court. The worry is that that becomes kind of a norm. We saw in the farm laws.
A precedent.
A precedent. We saw in the farm laws that a committee is appointed. You are a judge. You are supposed to decide as per the Constitution and the law. If parties want to settle, you can suggest it and leave it at that. You are not supposed to appoint mediators. We saw in Shaheen Jahan, we saw in the Shaheen Bagh, when the roads were blocked. Again, mediators are appointed. Because that, to me, almost politicizes the role of a judge. The judge is now getting into the system of governance, trying to sort out a law and order problem. And that is no role of a judge. A judge should keep away from politics. If something's happening or not happening, for instance, in the Ayodhya judgment, shortly before the verdict was supposed to be pronounced, we all read in the papers that the Chief Justice summoned the police and said that this judgment is coming tomorrow. I hope there won't be a law and order problem. So you then worry, well, if the judge is worried about the law and order problem after the delivery of the judgment and is called police chiefs, was that also somehow reflected in the reasoning of his judgment? That was he thinking that if I rule in a particular way, this will be the fallout of law and order? I don't want that, therefore. So is governance and politics replacing law and constitutions in our courts? Now, that's a very real fear when you do these kind of things.
But Saurabh, you talked about, and I just want to shift the conversation a little bit away, and then we'll open it up to the House in a minute or so. You talked about women and how they've been oppressed over the centuries. We talked about Dalits, backward caste people. But I mean, I'm a Hindu woman. Now, friends of mine who are Muslim do not like the idea that the Muslim personal law comes in the way of equal rights, right? Whether it's inheritance, whether it's marriage. So when the government does pass a law which sort of attempts at creating this equality, there is also a lot of sort of blowback. How would you look at that?
I think it's because of the trust deficit. That's the main problem. The idea of the Uniform Civil Code was contentious even in our Constitution. There was a lot of discussion about it. You must remember the Constitution was framed in the background of partition. There was a great deal of enmity and suspicion between the Hindus and Muslims of India. So when a discussion came about putting a Uniform Civil Code in the Constitution, the Muslim minority immediately got their back up saying, no, that means you will impose your views on us, which is why it was moved from a fundamental rights chapter to the directive principles of state policy. So our Constitution, as far back as 1950, recognizes that there has to be a need for a Uniform Civil Code. I really, as a citizen who also believe that there are endemic inequalities in virtually every personal law in our country. We removed a lot of them in Hindu law.
In the Hindu law in 1954.
In 54,
and
55.
Rajendra Prasad as president was not in favor of
He
that.
refused to sign.
But then
Yeah.
the court went ahead and you did pass it.
Yeah,
I mean, the parliament went ahead and passed it.
Yes,
Yeah.
Parliament went ahead, but not fully, because women were not co-parceners. So that change came in 2005. There are lots and lots of changes that are required in personal laws. I believe Muslim law is regressive in its treatment to women because it's ossified at a time when the law was first promulgated. So obviously, society has changed over 600 years. The law hasn't. The way Hindu law also would have otherwise been ossified. So we need to change the law to make it more equitable to women, particularly, and also the queer community. But as I said, the trust deficit is that when you have people in positions of power making inflammatory statements and generally appearing to seem to be closer to one particular religious community than others, there is fear that this UCC is not really about our benefit to women, but it is about a cultural hegemony. Now, that may not be how it works out in practice, because the UCC will be neutral, I hope. But when you have this fear, the better way to go about it is, I think, why don't we start by reforming the laws as exist within each personal law? The way the Hindu code was brought in, the way 2005 there was change. Why, for the last 80 years, has Parliament just sat on its hands and done nothing? Yeah.
No, and done nothing about what?
Making changes to Muslim personal law so that it's equitable to women. Why did you wait till the Supreme Court judgment comes, strikes down the triple talaq? Once it's struck down, you then bring in a legislation.
But something is better than nothing, right, Saurabh?
What I'm saying, nothing happened, right? So there is no reform in Muslim personal law in the last 75 years.
But now that the Parliament, the Supreme Court has struck down the triple talaq.
Only one thing, there's so many other instances of discrimination. There has to be wholesale reform, but within the personal law of that community, you can do it. You don't need to bring a UCC to improve the lot of women. The idea when you bring in the UCC in this charged political atmosphere is that it is a political act rather than some kind of an act to bring about true equality. Because if you wanted to do that, you had 10 years to bring in legislation to bring equality in various spheres. You didn't do that, did you?
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to open this up to the House. Please say who you are and who you want the question to, Saurabh or Rohin. Yeah, go ahead. No, you can just speak without it. Tell us who you are.
The mic is coming. The mic is coming.
I am K. Mahesh. I am a civil servant.
Where?
In Delhi. Mr. Kirpal, I just want to know, do you think the caste identities dominate over the national identity? Why I'm saying this is because we have exported caste with IT. You look at UK, they wanted to bring in the SC/ST legislation. Well, it was not done. Canada has problems of caste. UK has problems. Our gurdwaras, even the Sikhs have gurdwaras which are based on their caste if you go to London, right?
What's the question?
The question, I will already ask the question that does the caste identity dominate over the national identity? The second point is, should we revisit the Pune Pact? You see, Mr. Ambedkar, we had reservations at the political level. But that has not led to leapfrogging social and economic development. Do you think we need to visit the Pune Pact? And the third, why don't we have a fiscal equality with respect to the personal laws? As a Hindu, I can file 2 income tax returns. One is as HUF and other as an individual. But a Muslim, he cannot file. Okay, a Christian cannot file. These are the 3 questions.
Thank you. Questions. Thank you.
So they're good questions. Yeah. About revisiting the Pune Pact, I'll just remind you that we've already revisited it. If you remember Pune Pact, when Mahatma Gandhi was in jail and Dr. Ambedkar went to Yerwada prison to meet him, he went to plead for the cause of Dalits and say, please have reservations, separate electorates for the Dalit community, which at that point existed for the Muslims and the Sikhs. So interestingly, in the Pune Pact, what happened was, you had reservations, electoral reservations, only for religious minorities, but not for the lower castes. The Constitution flipped that. So the Constitution revisited the Pune Pact and gave reservations for the Dalits and not for the religious minorities. So that's really the answer in the second part. We've revisited it. That Pune Pact is no longer part of our constitutional way of being. As regards the first part, the conflict between a national identity and a caste identity is a wrong question to ask, I'm afraid, because all of us have multiple identities. I hope all of those multiple identities merge into who you are, right? I am an Indian, I am queer, I am a man, I am upper caste. To expect me to value one over the other is to do injustice to every other identity. Our preamble also says, let us ask for unity, dignity, and integrity, ask for dignity, liberty, equality, and fraternity, so that the unity of India can be maintained. Because the belief, and it is right, is that when you force people to choose one identity over another, and you force people to live poorly because of one particular identity, that's not going to help the national identity. When you oppress Dalits, when you oppress minorities, when you oppress women, do you think that's a cause for national integration? No. And why is national identity meaning a particular thing? National identity means multiple things. One facet of that national identity is my caste identity, right? So that's how I would say, don't put these identities at war with each other. There's enough that's dividing us. I know that was not your intention.
Okay, any other questions? No. You could, yes, Mr. Singh, go ahead.
Sir, I am General KJ Singh. We have this increased demonstration of Supreme Court trying to force the pace of HR-related changes in the armed forces. Now, armed forces has a unique environment, and it has got an accountability which can't be defined. There are no runners-ups in war. So, while you want to mediate, have conciliation on those issues, how is it that you don't want to give armed forces a chance to do it? Okay, you nudge us. But why should there be this desire to say that do it immediately?
Are the armed forces special, Saurabh?
Well, our constitution does give a certain immunity to the armed forces in the fundamental rights chapter as well. Okay. But, you know, to answer your question, you have to push a person who doesn't get nudged. I presume you're talking about including women in the armed forces. Well, that's the interference of HR. I assume that's the point. And to me, as long as you have the constitution of the form it does, which prohibits discrimination on the ground of sex in at least 2 articles, 14 and 15, when you have the directive principles of state policy, which say that you must strive towards equal pay for equal women and you must have equality in jobs. When you have lived in a free country from 1947 till 2019, which I presume would have been enough time for the armed forces to have got their act sorted together and start engaging the services of women. When none of that happens and your nudges aren't working, then you need the court to come in and push and say, well, this is what the Constitution promised all of us. We live in a country which is governed by civilians, while the armed forces have a special place in all of our hearts for the immense sacrifices they have made. They cannot be above the Constitution. That happens in our neighboring countries. That does not happen in India.
If I can step in just here.
Sure.
And I think there has been certain resistance to human rights from the armed forces. No disrespect, but when homosexuality was decriminalized in 2018, General Rawat came on the TV next day saying, we won't accept it, right? Same is the case with adultery. Homosexuality and adultery, which are no longer crimes for, or didn't used to be crimes for the civilians, continue to remain crimes under the Army, Navy, and the Air Force Acts. I know people who
Even today?
Even today. I know people who are part of the Army who are queer and can't live their full lives simply because, well, they either risk losing their jobs or they can't be themselves, which I think is a very sort of Sophie's choice to make, as it were. So I think and the Supreme Court has kind of also faltered on that. Supreme Court has a sketchy history there where for the civilians, they've said that adultery is not a crime, but then they revisit the judgment and say, well, for armed forces, we'll continue to keep it a crime. So, you know, the Supreme Court is not always
what's
pushed.
What's the moral of the story? Join the armed forces if you want.
If you're straight.
No, I'm just joking, guys. Go ahead, the young lady.
But the government legislation, the state or central legislation can always change
Yeah, can be amended by the legislature. Hanji, Hanji. That's true for everything, right? Go ahead, young lady. Yeah, can you tell us who you are? We can't hear you. No.
I'm Saisha. I'm living in Kasauli, and well, I'm learning a lot in every Lit Fest that I'm attending here. So my question to you sort of mixes up everything everyone's spoken, and of course you as well. From my understanding of living in the forces and being, of course, in all cultures and all religions for that matter and communities, I understand the roots of all our communities, and of course,
You have to ask the question.
Ma'am, I have to sort of build it up.
No,
We've
building up. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry.
It's a question. My final question is, we've always been an open-minded culture. Do you feel it's misinterpretation over the years in religions or communities that has led to where we are, and now we're taking corrective measures?
Okay. Thank you, my dear. That's a good question. Yeah. Rohin, go ahead.
Well, I think when we are living in a society, I think all of us are kind of, I think it's uniquely Indian, is to kind of not question and be subservient. So I think that may not perhaps be true. I know people within the armed forces who have experienced, and have told me about it, first-hand accounts of discrimination in the armed forces. And what you're seeing day by day is a growing sort of Hinduization of the armed forces by political forces. And the army has pushed back to a certain degree, but they've not been successful. You know, you have Rajnath Singh a few days ago lining up, putting tilaks on all of multiple soldiers belonging to multiple faiths. So I think there is...
No, there's nothing wrong with that. I will say so, even in my role as the moderator. I think that there can be many lines that you cross, but I think putting tilak on a Hindu and a Christian and a Muslim and whatever kind of soldier, frankly, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But we can all have different views.
If I can just push back,
yes, of course,
one sentence.
Yes.
I think the question then is, does the person have the agency to refuse to stand there when the defense minister...
It's about respect for each other. I think that's what it is about. And that's, okay, yeah. But listen, we are, sorry about that, but yes, the lady here. Yes, sir. Lady ke baad, sir. Hamesha lady ke baad. Of course I'm being biased. It's my prerogative to do that.
I'm Anu Govind. Thank God. Okay. Thank God I'm married to a fighter pilot in the Indian Air Force who's retired as an Air Marshal. And thank God I don't have a brother. And thank God for many other things. But what I want to say here is, long time ago we heard Nani Palkhiwala say in 91 that for about the next 45 years, if you do not have fresh cases in the Bombay High Court, only then can you solve these cases.
Ma'am, you have to ask the question. I'm sorry, we are really running out of time.
Why the delay? Why the delay? So much of delay.
So much of delay. Come on,
That's
Saurabh.
a million-dollar question. Yeah. If it could be sorted out, actually, delay in courts actually puts back India's GDP growth, because dispute of contracts which are never resolved stop people from investing. You need a lot of investment. It's a lot of hard work. The problem is everyone wants a shiny, bright fruit, the low-hanging fruit. They want the quick fixes to difficult solutions, different problems, so there's not been enough money been pumped into the judicial infrastructure, not enough judges appointed. When we change our Indian Penal Code and the Criminal Procedure Code, we reproduce it virtually identically. We don't actually bring about reform in the laws that needs to be done. So there's multiple failures by multiple organizations. There is no one person, I would say, is free from blame. It's easy for the judges to say, no, what can we do? It's the parliament's job to give us money. But I'm sorry, there's problem in every level.
Okay, the gentleman here right in front in the first row.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
Good morning.
Ma'am, my question is that why don't we pass a provision so that the High Court judges, justices, and the Chief Justice, they are not appointed to various positions like governor or ambassador or to other countries or other constitutional this thing, so there,
सर
so
सवाल किसको है सर?
so that
सवाल आप किसको पूछ रहे हैं?
मैं आप तीनों इन
नहीं
दोनों
नहीं
को
नहीं ऐसा नहीं
okay,
सर मैं तो मॉडरेटर
okay,
हूँ.
okay, okay, इन दोनों को so that
अच्छा.
their last days judgments are not influenced for the after retirement benefits.
Okay. Ah, very good question.
Like Justice Gogoi also, he got something, whether as a Rajya Sabha member and others also. They aspire for these things after post-retirement.
And also the judge in the the Calcutta High Court, right, who joined the BJP within hours of retiring.
You see, this is that kind of shiny answer that why judges are not neutral is a very complex question. It almost never has anything to do with post-retirement benefits. A judge is not swayed one way or the other because they think they're going to get Rajya Sabha or get governorship. It means not much for them because they will retire. They'll earn far more in arbitrations. They'll get a lot more money. They already have the name. So when you pass a judgment, pass a law which will prohibit post-retirement benefits, it looked really good. But it's not going to solve the problem that you've identified, which is why judges are not completely unbiased and free. That problem requires a lot more effort. And that's what I'm saying. We typically tend not to do things which require a lot of effort. We need to improve the quality of our legal education to make sure that people who are becoming lawyers are good people. We need to ensure that our judicial system moves fast and is efficient. We want to make sure that if you lose a case because of a certain error that you've done, that costs are imposed. These are tough things to do. That will generate an ecosystem where the people who come up are people who are upright women and men of this country. That will stop a particular form of decision making. Post-retirement benefits just sounds very nice, and it should be done. Maybe it should be done, but it's not going to solve anything.
Right, ladies and gentlemen. Okay.
Good afternoon. I'm Bhupen.
He already has the mic, so the guy
I
who
thought-
has the
I
mic controls
must
the
ask
narrative.
for it, yes.
Yeah.
See, I've been here for last 3 days, quite thought-provoking. So my direct question: why the intellectuals are villainizing the word majority? I've been listening it for last 3 days. Majority and minority.
Ask an intellectual. Why are you asking us?
No, because it was used by the panel. It was used by the panel. That's why I'm asking.
What was used by the panel?
You mentioned about the majority somewhere and the minority. See, till most of us are 40 plus, till about 25, 30, I never knew I was majority. That thought was
That's
never
why you
there
didn't
in
know
my
your
mind.
caste either.
So you people,
I see your point.
intellectuals.
If I can just answer that. The majority is very good at defending itself through the power of the ballot. You have elections where the majority will come into power, and hopefully, as it should, Parliament will reflect the will of majority. We are lawyers speaking about constitutions, about those who do not have that mechanism of providing for them their own safety. The Constitution gives us fundamental rights because the majority doesn't need the fundamental rights. They have Parliament with them. They have the executive with them. We have to talk about the minorities because they need those extra protections. You help a child, you don't help someone who doesn't need any help, right? And when we're talking about helping, that's what the Constitution promised to do. So when you talk of the majority...
Ladies and gentlemen, you will agree that this has been a fascinating discussion. I think the only takeaway that all of us can have from this is that the Constitution is your only Bible, your only Gita, and your only Quran Sharif. A big hand for Saurabh Kirpal and Rohin Bhatt.